being there. I think being there is good, but I don't know what's not quality time, but it's a low quality time, or
Yeah.
medium quality time. Because any time is great. It's like it doesn't have to be quality time. Don't beat yourself up. Life's hard enough as it is. Now you're being asked to sort of be this kind of super parent.
Welcome to the 7 Day Soul TV and the A Tweak a Week podcast. If you are someone who wants to reach your full potential, who feels like you have more to give, who doesn't want to let your short time here slip through your fingers, then you finally found your tribe. I'm your host, psychologist and author Susanna Healy, and on this show, we'll be talking with expert researchers about all things psyche and soul so that you can achieve your full potential and live a life without regrets. To reach the better angels of our nature, we know the devil's in the detail of what we do repeatedly. So we'll be talking habits, existential health, bucket lists, meaning, mattering, sleep, self-actualization, responsibility, discipline, faith, procrastination, gratitude, goal setting, sex, focus, careers, and loads more. Let's inject the everyday with a passion for your potential. But before we start, just a reminder, if you like the show, then don't forget to subscribe. You can also get your free 100 tips for daily progress by visiting the 7daysoul.com homepage. Or if your workplace is all about human potential and you'd like to sponsor the show, then reach out to join us. Details are in the show notes. Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of the A Tweak a Week podcast. Good to have you here with me today. I'm Susanna Healy, if we haven't met before, and today my guest is Tom Hodgkinson. A prolific author and writer and editor. He's editor of the Idler magazine, or co-editor and publisher of the Idler magazine. He's also published numerous books. I have to look at my list, Tom, just to kind of to read them all out. But going back to 2005, How to Be Idle, the Book of Idle Pleasures, The Idle Parent, Why Less Means More When Raising Kids, How to Be Free, Business for Bohemians, How to Live in the Country, and the Idler magazine started back in, I think, 1991, and which was described as literature for loafers, which I really liked that. I thought that was quite catchy. So, Tom, thank you for coming and welcome to A Tweak a Week.
Thank you.
Tom, I suppose kind of, we can see obviously there that there is this theme in all of your work about idling. Now, I suppose the first thing is to say you've certainly been busy talking about idling, but where did it all come from? And, because it very much seems to kind of go against the grain of modern living. Where did the idea come from?
I can remember the specific time I had that actual idea sort of popped into my mind. And I was, I think, about sort of 23 maybe. And I was renting a room in Portobello Road in West London. I had a sort of 3 days a week job at the Sunday Mirror magazine. And, I wanted to be a journalist. Both my parents were journalists, or they still are actually. And I'd sort of grown up with English literature and producing magazines since I was about 8, just for fun. All sorts of different magazines, The Penguin, the Sixth Form Times, and a magazine called Broadsheet when I was at university. So it was kind of something that came naturally to me and which I enjoyed. But I wasn't really enjoying my job at the time. So I had these days off when I would try and do my own work. And, in those days, being a freelance journalist, you would be, there was no fax I think the fax had started to come in, but there was certainly no sort of internet or email. So I'd spend my days photocopying my cuttings, sending ideas into editors, not getting a reply, going down to see whether the post had come. Anyway, and not getting out of bed. That was the critical thing. So I'd be sort of lying in bed on my day off, and it would be sort of 8, 9, 10, and I'd still be in bed. And I'd get very angry with myself. And I would sink into this sort of pit of self-loathing until I read some essays by Dr. Johnson. And I'll just tell, in case not everyone knows who he is or was, but he's a very appealing character from the 18th century. He was around in the sort of 1700s. He started life very poor. He went to Oxford but couldn't finish it because his parents couldn't afford it. He became a journalist, and then he became a very well-known journalist and a sort of top writer at the time. And he wrote the first English dictionary. So he wasn't exactly lazy. Yeah. He wrote loads of poetry and poems, plays. He was very sociable too. And we know a lot about him from his diaries and also from Boswell, who wrote a book about him. in Johnson's diaries, he tells himself off for staying in bed all morning. And he said, I really need to get up earlier next year. And he makes these resolutions every year, pretty much until he dies in, I think, his mid-60s. He's still saying, I must get up earlier next year. So I found that really comforting. But also, he wrote a series of essays called The Idler. And he talked about how idleness is actually an important part of life. It's an important part of the creative process. Okay. So actually, when you look like you're doing nothing, when you're lying in bed, you're acting in a different way. It doesn't look like activity, but your brain's working. You're thinking, you're creating. And that's useful for anybody. So I suddenly realized that, this thing idling, being lazy, which we're told off for by our kind of work ethic obsessed society, is actually a very, very good thing. And that's what I want to do in the magazine, to produce a magazine called The Idler, which presented all the positive aspects of laziness, contemplation, doing nothing, or whatever it might be. Mm. And we managed to produce the first issue. I got sacked from my job. I was on the dole. I got a friend involved who had a computer. We managed to raise a few £100 and we printed 1,000 copies. And, we had a magazine. To me, it was like the sort of punk spirit of just having an idea and and getting on with it, even if you don't have the money. So there's this whole line of magical thinking, which is, what would you do if you had £1 million? Mm-hmm. Do it anyway. And that's kind of what we were doing. I was very inspired by people like the Care Left, the pop musicians of the 90s. This idea of just doing it, just getting on with it. So that's the paradox you mentioned, because it's quite a lot of hard work to put a magazine together. We've been on major labels, we've been chucked off them, we've gone bankrupt nearly, we've restarted. But all through it, and in my books, which you mentioned, is this idea of idling is good in all sorts of different areas.
Yeah, and it's kind of productive idling, really. It's because it sounds like what we're talking about is just the fact that, something. Maybe we're so obsessed with how we appear on the outside that we need to look busy all the time and we need to look productive all the time, and what will other people think? Because from what I'm hearing from you, and you mentioned it, that it's really about reflection and inactivity, rest. But, that's kind of, I suppose I talk about modes of mind, and it's really perhaps just introducing the option of knowing kind of our different gears of mind, and knowing that actually we may look inactive, and it might be because you also talk about fun, don't you, and humor, and because that again puts us in a different mode of mind. So really it's about learning to be able to pause, isn't it, and go into a different, perhaps more creative space, more contemplative space, whatever it might be. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's a sort of it's quite radical. It's a sort of an attack on the cult of productivity, I suppose, and even on what we call capitalism, or at least the sort of the system by which we sort of operate today, which as I said, which really sort of emphasizes hard work and productivity. It's a very sort of utilitarian, numbers-based world, isn't it? I mean, it's got even worse. That you're encouraged to have these social media things and count your followers, and we measure out our worth in terms of numbers. Well, there's a whole other world out there which has been slightly neglected. I mean, let's go to a cathedral now. These, there's 50 or 60 cathedrals were built in England between 1100 and 1300 and Wales. And these were temples of inactivity. It just shows you how important it was to do nothing for people in quite recent times, which was the Middle Ages. Religion, religion can be extremely oppressive and gets taken over by these sort of tyrants. But at its heart, it's saying, let's find the space for doing nothing. What's the most important part of life? It's in the Sermon on the Mount. Consider the lilies. They toil not, neither do they spin. Yet I say to you that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed as one of these. And Christ says, don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow will take care of itself. Okay. These are quite sort of like radical ideas, really. And actually they're at the heart of most religions. But Buddhism emphasizes so there is this other world which we have to engage with. We have to earn money. People say, well, it's all right for you because you can sort of sit around doing nothing. I have to earn money just like anybody else. We all do. but we also should make space, as you say, for our idle time, for our own sake. My argument is that idling is good for the spirit, the soul, the brain, the body, the mind, everything. You need these long periods of downtime, and long working days, in particular, can be very damaging. The long working day reached its kind of height probably in the sort of mid 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
There was an act that was brought in by Parliament called the 60 Hours Act, which was petitioning to reduce the working day for women and children under 13 to 60 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
So what was it before?
Yeah.
And people were literally dying in the dark Titanic mills. And luckily there were some Victorian reformers who shortened the working week. Nowadays, for a lot of people, it's reasonable. It's 38, 40 hours a week. That's certainly an improvement. But we could do better.
Yeah.
So, we campaign for things like that for a shorter working week. In general, I think we need to move towards a society which places less pressure on work and supports the idea of idling more strenuously.
Yeah, yeah. And I think because there is that kind of, I think a lot of the time people kind of say, oh, we work so hard nowadays, but actually we work less. But I think we work less hours, as you say, but than we did, a century ago. But we seem to value productivity enormously. And now there are some these kind of research organizations that are actually saying that because of AI, that productivity is going to increase so much that we're likely to see a kind of a 3.5, some say 4-day week coming sooner rather than later. And then there was also kind of, the whole theme of kind of the 4-day work week and that kind of thing, this idea of packing it all into a certain amount of time. And it's interesting because the guy Hans Sale, who was a researcher and doctor, but he was the first guy to introduce the word stress into our vocabulary. He researched the whole stress axis in the body, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. But he talked about that in the future we were going to need play professions. And, he talked about stress, he introduced stress, and now we're kind of like, we're all about stress. But he said in the future, we're going to need play professions, philosophy, hobbies. You talk about fishing in the book, and I loved that because it reminded me. I even actually, and I will talk about How to Be Idle, even though I know it's a 20-year-old book, but I just absolutely adored it. It was brilliantly referenced and pulled together a huge amount of information. But you talk about fishing, and it actually inspired me to kind of look up. I wonder, could I go fishing in December? Is there anything I can catch with my youngest in December and January? Is there anything in the rivers? So, but he talked about these play professions, and by the sounds of things, with the advent of AI, do you think that we're going to have to get better at this, at another type of activity?
Yeah, but I don't think it's anything to do with AI. I mean, we've been having this conversation for sort of centuries and centuries. When the water mill came in, everyone said, "Oh, that's great. We'll have more leisure time," and that was in sort of 200 BC or something like that. We had machines in the 19th century. That didn't make any difference. It just made the working day longer. Machinery and automation don't necessarily lead to a shorter working week. That point was made by Bertrand Russell, who wrote an essay in defense of idling, which is one of our key texts, because it's a really clever. He was a very clever person. And he was one of many intellectuals in the 30s who were saying, look, we've got to be using our ingenuity to campaign for a shorter working week. The problem is that when you get what the business owners will tend to do if they get a machine that decreases the need for paying staff is sack staff. So what they won't do generally, let's say you get a new machine for making pins, and it could make the same amount of pins in half the time. He says a sensible society would go, this is great. We got this machine that will produce the same amount of pins in half the time that it used to take. So that means we only have to work 20 hours a week, No, what they do is sack half the workers.
Yeah.
So, under those sort of conditions, I mean, there's a lot of nonsense. This happened about 8 years ago. The robots were going to be reducing the working week. Now it's AI. Now it's something else. I mean, it's all a ridiculous overhype. I mean, obviously AI is a great tool, for example, for coders, for people who get stuck writing stuff. But it's this idea that AI will do all the work while we sort of sit around doing nothing is completely and utter nonsense. Because AI can't build a brick wall. AI can't sort of mend the car. And also people have to run the AI machine. So what's actually quite interesting is that you look at the employment rates over the last sort of 100 years or 50 years, 10 years in the US and UK, China. Old professions go out, where are the secretaries? New ones come in. We didn't have any full stack digital marketing executives, sort of 10, 20 years ago. So weirdly, things sort of even out. However, having said all that, boring on, the 4-day week, I think, is a real thing, and it is starting to happen. We work with a Cambridge professor, Brendan Birchall, who is one of the main researchers in the UK on the 4-day week, and he's a great advocate for it. He does trials with companies, lots of people, 80,000 people. He shows that, productivity goes up, people are happier. It's not the first time they've tried this. In Kellogg's in the 1910s and 1920s, the women workers there pressed for a shorter working week so they could spend more time with their families. When they were moving towards a 3-4 day working week before between the wars, but it kind of got derailed by the Second World War and by the Depression. But Roosevelt had been sort of looking at it. So it's not a new idea. And then, again, you go back to the Middle Ages, and we had so many days off for festivals and parties and feast days, holy days, that most people would work. And of course, there wasn't electric light, so you couldn't work all night. And that also goes back to Romans and Greeks, Egyptians. There was a lot of the idea of the Jewish Sabbath, there were a lot of rest days, and then there's other famous research that says that hunter-gatherers worked about 15 or 20 hours a week, and the rest of the time was for feasting and fun and play. And I think that is happening. The problem is you have to have these sort of quite cold, reasonable arguments for it. So businesses have to be told, you will make more money if you go to a 4-day working week.
Yeah.
If that argument is put to them coherently and they believe it, then they will change. Not for kind of not for humanitarian reasons or because their people are dying. By the way, I was going to say I'm fond of this certain statistic. I'm not fond of it. It's absolutely horrifying. But there was a report from only last week, a couple of weeks ago, end of September, from the UN. They have a division called the International Labour Organization, the ILO. And this ILO works on work. And their most recent report looked at deaths through jobs. How many people are killed through work each year in the world? And if you compare the deaths for something like alcohol and drugs, I think combined kill about something like 300,000 or 400,000 people. Work kills nearly 3 million people each year. It's an incredibly high statistic.
Are you talking about dangerous work like mining or something like that? Or
it's a mixture, and it's a lot in Asia. Farming is the most dangerous occupation. But it's also people dying from stressful people who die early because of and they inhale fumes. It's a real scandal, actually. And those people are sort of suffering and dying so that someone somewhere is going to be making a lot of profit for themselves. So I do think there's something in that. People think it's old-fashioned nowadays to talk about Karl Marx, and but there was something in that. We need to sort of watch out for that. And then on a softer level, managers need to make their jobs better. They need to make them more fun. Yes, we're not all going to suddenly be jobless tomorrow. That's obviously not going to happen. and not everyone wants to be a sort of a freelancer. It's quite stressful, you know. You don't know where your next dime is coming from.
Yeah.
If you have a job, then at least you know that you've got this sort of monthly check coming in, and that removes a lot of fear and precarity from life. But yeah, I think the 4-day week, you know, I think that will become a thing, and it already is. COVID actually did change our attitudes to work, and I think people were worried. Well, what are we going to do with all this free time? We were fine. I mean, okay, I know a lot of people were not
pretty
fine.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm fully aware that it was a nightmare for lots of people. It was like, what, you mean I'm not allowed to work?
Yeah.
I'm being paid to not work. I'm being paid 80% of my salary, and I'm not allowed to work. Like, yeah, this is great, you know.
Yeah.
And what did people do? They you know, they were in the garden. They were reading more. They were educating themselves. We run online courses. They went mad in lockdown. You know, a lot of people read The Idler, which was great for us because they had time to read it and they enjoyed it. So, you know, I think that not only that, but there's a very there's an ecological argument for idling, because it's activity that causes pollution and carbon emissions. You know, if you just sat at home doing nothing, you wouldn't produce any pollution or carbon emissions. And there were maps, I think, you know, at the time of COVID, which showed that you know, there was less activity, less pollution, and that's good for global warming. So I think in all, on a personal level, you know, on a societal, you know, on a social level, you know, to reduce the emphasis on work as a kind of salvation for everybody, really makes a lot of sense in a practical way, and it's going to improve your everyday life. We don't, you know, Elon Musk is crazy. We don't all want to work 90-hour weeks. I mean, a few lunatics do, but for most people, we want to have a sensible sort of mixture.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes if it's that much work going on, you know, sometimes it's because it's actually it's too difficult at home or something like that, you know. So I mean, that can be the case as well. It's just easier to be at work where everybody's generally, as I always kind of say, keeps a social mask on and is generally polite to each other, which isn't always the case at home, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, so and I do remember those memes that went around kind of like during COVID, where you know, suddenly there were various different wildlife wandering around, whatever was in various different countries, the wildlife that was appropriate to that country. You know, there were alligators walking across roads and this kind of stuff and all sorts of things, because all the animals were coming back out and kind of reclaiming spaces, which it was absolutely gorgeous, to be honest. We just realized what we had pushed aside. You mentioned there, because it is really easy to, to also, you know, glorify the idea, kind of like being self-employed and, you know, follow your heart and do what really meaningful. And that is actually, it sounds like what you were able to do, and you've survived it. And yet we do know about the statistics of, you know, how many people actually do survive in actually making a living in self-employment. It's really, really difficult. And so it's not perhaps to kind of recommend that everybody just kind of says, oh, I'll follow my heart now and jump ship from the big brands. And yet the big brands really need to kind of serve people, don't they? Rather, it's been the wrong way around, hasn't it? We've been in the service of the big brands rather than business, which isn't anything other than a logo at the end of the day without people. You know, isn't that true? So could I ask you a little bit about, in terms of your journey through the magazine and with The Idler, and that sense of entrepreneurship, and sometimes facing, as you mentioned, bankruptcy and challenges, would you still recommend it? And because obviously it was meaningful to you, the theme of, you were passionate about this subject, presumably.
Yes, I mean, I don't know whether I would recommend it or not. Things were a lot easier in the 90s, you know, and we were really lucky to have this patronage of the Guardian newspaper, and they gave us jobs. When I say we, I mean me and my friend Gavin, who I used to run the magazine with. And the 90s was a very creative period, and things seemed easier then. There seemed to be more money around. I don't know. Magazines are really hard. I mean, the other day I met a former editor of The Spectator, and he said, well, how's it going at The Idler? And I said, well, yeah, it's not too bad. We actually made a profit last year. It only took us 29 years. And he said, well, when I was editor of The Spectator, we made our first profit. And that was 153 years after it was launched. It was launched in 1828. And then someone else said, the Times never made a profit in the 20th century. So newspapers and magazines, they look quite sort of fun from the outside. But I think you're right. It's easy to be glib with the advice, follow your dreams, follow your passion or whatever. It's not that easy. One thing I've noticed is that people who are successful in business, usually actually they've come from, they've been at something like JP Morgan for 10 years and they've decided to set up a business. They've got so much money behind their business, and starting a business with zero money is really incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
It's extremely hand to mouth. Victoria, my partner, and I, we ran a bookshop in London for 4.5 years. And that's a nice idea. Wouldn't it be nice to run a bookshop? That'd be a nice way to live. And then it would also be a cafe, and people would hang out there, and it'd be lovely. And in the evenings, we'd have lectures and talks and classes. Well, we did this. We borrowed about, I suppose, 50, 60 grand in total from different sources, a bank loan and a remortgage, and sat in this shop and employed people for 4.5 years. And it was really hard going, and it's incredibly hard work. We never really made any money out of it. They put the rent up, and that was just a sort of modest, fun idea for a business, which, it didn't make any money. So you're sort of, what's the point of this? I could be earning more on the dole, and I'm killing myself doing this. We look back now with fondness. It was a creative project that we conceived and did, and it was great in some ways. I wrote a book about this called Business for Bohemians. Well, I used to say to people, quit your job, stop working for the man. I'm a bit more cautious now.
Yeah.
I'm definitely aware. Everyone wants to be a pop star.
Yeah.
But then actually the reality of it, and being a writer, being a pop star, being any of these things, a musician, it's bloody hard going.
Yeah. There's so much, isn't there, out there, the kind of the follow your heart thing, and maybe it's a social media meme type thing, but actually perhaps maybe side hustle your heart might be a good start.
Well, maybe, yeah, and you can't necessarily expect making the kind of profit that a salary would give you in your first year of business is absolutely impossible. I mean, people say it takes 6 or 7 years to get a business going. Now look at all these big businesses; they spend for years and years. Uber spent $15 or $16 billion in order to build up a business that was profitable. It lost billions and billions of dollars every year for about 20 years, billions, literally. Because it was using that money to destroy all the competition. Yeah. Maybe that's not a good example. I guess, it's just such a horrible business. But yeah, on an individual level. But having said that, it's the best way to live. For me, I couldn't have a job. I guess personally speaking, I couldn't do it. People are, they're really, really unhappy at work. If you're really unhappy at work, you've got to get out of that job, definitely. Yeah. And I think if you can get to a position where Bob Dylan said something like, success means that you do what you want each day, what you've chosen to do. That's not necessarily means it's easy. And that's the kind of a freedom that I look for in running a small business. And I'd rather have that than have lots of money, And so there's that. I think it is a great way to live, but it's fraught with perils, and you have to put up with big ups and downs. Perhaps an unexpectedly enormous tax bill, which makes you feel sick, and makes you kind of go into a kind of hot flush of fear.
Yeah. And there's nobody to pass the buck to.
Well, that's the other thing. But I remember someone had a lemonade stall at a festival, and they said, "Oh, thanks to you, we quit our job, and now we're selling lemonade." And I was like, "Oh my god, I hope they're okay." You don't have to follow my advice. But
were they said, smiling or gritting their teeth?
Yeah, they said it's a nightmare, but it's my nightmare. So my nightmare is preferable to. I think the thing about jobs for a lot of people is that there's this what I used to not like about having a full-time job was a kind of a feeling of helplessness. Yeah. So all you can do is sort of moan about it to your partner. I worked at The Guardian for 2 or 3 or 4 years. It was a great job. We were incredibly lucky. and it was a wonderful company. I mean, thank you so much, Guardian. But even that, I felt, for me personally, in the end, it was a little bit too like, if you want to move your way up through an organisation, you have to sort of, mostly you have to play politics, at least to an extent. And that's what didn't interest me. I was only interested in the actual work itself, which I really enjoyed. And so I was actually happy to sort of get out of that full-time work environment. I haven't been back since 1997. Yeah. But as I said, it's a step to take with great caution.
Yeah. And it's, I think what we're talking about is kind of, because I know you used the phrase, living as an art, so that idea of kind of crafting your life a little bit. And again, it's about, I suppose the whole podcast is about becoming conscious of where you're headed. And are you happy with that? Or is there something that you want to change? Or perhaps lots of things that you want to change. So it is, whether it's mindset, whether it's time, whether it's a little bit more time for reflection, whether it's kind of entrepreneurship, whatever it might be, it's crafting our time and actually kind of taking the reins. And could I ask you, in terms of, because, you have gone down that path, but what about somebody who's watching and they're kind of, in the usual, town living, perhaps busy commute to work, not self-employed, working employees, both partners working, busy times, children, and what I often find is that actually for a lot, especially when kids are young, the weekends are really just going from out of the frying pan into the fire, aren't they? It's just a different type of busyness. But it's very hard to do, isn't it, to get the kind of the idling if your surroundings are demanding of you that, well, no, because your child wants to go to this party and that party, and they should also be doing ballet lessons and football and whatever else. Is there a way of putting it into, is it okay to do a little bit of it? And can we, realistically?
I think it's really the hardest time of life. I mean, it can be, it's great fun and very rewarding. But a young couple with young children, it's very tough, and I've been there. We have 3 children. Life's a lot easier now. The youngest is 18, and they're very self-sufficient. So I know from experience how hard it is. And I actually wrote a book about it called The Idle Parent, which I tried to sort of, look at these things. How can we sort of bring some idleness in? I mean, actually, what we did was we opted for a much cheaper way of living. We moved out of London and rented a really sort of falling down farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, which is very cheap to rent. And also at that time, I was writing books, and I cut my working day down to 4 hours a day. And Victoria wasn't really working. She was doing a bit of work, but not that. So we tried to create a situation where we were sort of actually around quite a lot in order to try to make it easier. And it was still a nightmare,
Yeah.
So I think it's very, very difficult. And I mean, I know that looking at our readers and customers, or we run holidays and festivals. You don't tend to get people with small children, younger children coming because they get so busy, and also the finances are so sort of stretched. So people who come to us they're post-children, pre-children, or they haven't got children, and so it's probably not the best time to launch a new enterprise when you have young ones.
Yeah, but even just trying to introduce even a little bit of, I mean, even just a little bit, even the little things like you were talking about. I know that plenty of people, if I, kind of say, well, download a relaxation exercise and, practice this week, whatever it might be, people will say, yeah, I park outside my local, supermarket or wherever, a public car parking space, and I put the seat back and I listen to it, because if I go home, I have the hope of listening to it. That's the end of peace. It's just a different type of chaos. And it's hard. It's kind of hard, isn't it? But yet at the same time, we desperately need to know, even to introduce some windows of, it may not be the kind of like the country life that we, lots of people would love, but some windows of time in the day, if not, if it, or else the week.
I think you have to sort of work with your partner on these things. And it's really hard because you have this sort of competition. You're tired. What about me? I'm exhausted, And and they sort of fight. One other main issue, if we're talking about children, was I also felt there that at the same time, compared to my parents, our generation of parents, I'm in my mid-50s, we were like totally over mollycoddled our children. I mean, my parents could seem to ignore me completely. 70s childhood, it was great. We had a lot of independence. And then it's sort of, maybe they neglected us too much and there was a reaction the other way. So those children who were neglected in the 70s, I don't know where it came from. Maybe it's an industry, but tended to sort of overparent in the noughties and get over worried about things. And they're worried about, just avalanche of worries. There are now worries about, computers and social media and everything. We didn't have social media, but we were worried about other things. And my point really was, modern parents don't do themselves many favors because they put too much work into parenting. That's actually not good for the child. Mm-hmm. They lose their self-sufficiency. You want your child to be able to, shine its own shoes and tie its own shoelaces and make its own packed lunch and these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And not to be sort of driven everywhere in an enormous SUV and kind of mollycoddled and worried and, cotton wool parenting, they call it. Yeah. And then, so there's that. And then there's this sort of guilt. Am I a good parent? Well, there was the famous psychologist Winnicott. And he said, don't try and be a good parent. Try and be a good enough parent. Mm-hmm. Try and be an okay parent. That's enough, Obviously, you're going to lose your temper and shout and scream. And but if there's sort of essentially love underneath it all, then, then that's okay. And the child is alive.
Yeah.
So I still think, well, how's it going? Yeah, it's fine. They're all alive. Good. Well done. And that's it. That's okay. It's as I said, it's really, really difficult. But the other thing is sleep. I think sleep is so important, and people neglect it, and they think they can sort of compensate for lack of sleep with things like coffee and energy drinks. You can't. You've got to sleep. Go to bed earlier. You're getting up at 6:30. You have to go to bed at 9. Sorry, but you can't watch TV all evening.
Yeah.
The other thing I find really annoying is someone says, I haven't got time for this, I haven't got time for that. Everyone seems to have plenty of time to watch hours and hours of Netflix every evening, or go on Instagram for hours and hours. So have a look at where you're spending this time. Could you sort of just go to bed at 9 and lie in bed for an hour? It's going to bed at 9 like when you're an oldie. It's amazing feeling. It's like, this is incredible. And I can just lie here for an hour and it's still only 10. And then I go to sleep and I wake up at 7. That's 9 hours. It's just bliss. But the modern world it kind of forces you to stay up late on your computer, watching YouTube, addictive TV, binge watching. You sit down and think, we'll watch one episode of The Crown or whatever, and then suddenly you're contemplating watching episode 3 and it's midnight. Yeah, and that completely ruins your next day, and you wake up feeling, oh my god, what did I do? So I think that's that. But all those Netflix and all those companies and YouTube, they've got so much money, they're just pumping this stuff at you all day long. So that's the problem that we idlers have, is like, we don't have billion-dollar advertising campaigns to make you do nothing. Yeah. The billion-dollar advertising campaigns, the people who want you to be incredibly active, even at the cost of sleep and so on. So I think those 3 things: sleep, maybe neglect your children a little bit more, and share the burden. Okay. With friends, family. I think prioritize sleep, go to bed earlier, share the burden, and work a little bit less hard on it, and try to sort of worry less about your children. As long as they're alive, you're doing okay.
Yeah, and it's true. We've brought productivity. We even talk about kind of quality time with the children, don't we? Instead of just they're there, and sometimes you're in the same household, and that's okay, because there's a sense of quality about that, isn't there?
Yeah, quality time. That's difficult concept. I get it. And particularly if you're both working in jobs, you want to spend some nice time with them. But there's something for sort of average quality time as well. Just being there. I think you can just be near them, and you can still get on with your own thing a bit. Whatever it might be, watching YouTube. But you're in the next room or you're in the same room. You're just around, so you're there. If like if they want to come and talk to you, they can. I think being there is good, but I don't know what's not quality time, but it's a low quality time, or
Yeah.
medium quality time. Because any time is great. It's like, it doesn't have to be quality time. Don't beat yourself up. Life's hard enough as it is. Now you're being asked to sort of be this kind of super parent. I mean, come on.
Yeah. No, I actually agree with you. I think sometimes it's just knowing you're there is all that they need, and then a bit of freedom. Now, I just want to ask you, because we talk in this about personal progress. This podcast is about personal progress. So just learning something new. So we're talking about here about kind of idling or whatever. But I talk about in mind, body, and spirit. Do you see, just you personally, would reflection be a spiritual practice to you, or would you kind of like not use that language about it at all? Do you find certain practices are spiritual or existentially relevant or whatever for you?
Well, yes, absolutely. I think there's a kind of spiritual dimension to this whole thing, because meditation, mindfulness, that's basically an activity.
Mm-hmm.
It's very good for you to slow down, to go inside and whatever it is, there's something, isn't there? I mean, I don't know what it is, a spirit or a soul, or we're not just a collection of atoms, I don't think, anyway. So let's kind of just touch base with that sometimes in different ways. You can do it in different ways. I've said this a million times, and I'm sure you have as well. Going for a long walk is an amazingly pleasurable thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
For me as well, it's cycling. I play tennis. It's reading. It's listening to music. Even ceremony and ritual and magic. I think I was talking to Rupert Sheldrake, who's quite a kind of out there philosopher, the other day for our magazine. You get taken to another place. There's and that's you also get that from football matches. So why is football so popular? Because it takes you out of your other. It takes you into a different world where you're part of a you're almost like your ego is subsumed. It's almost a sort of spiritual experience for people. Chanting, watching football.
Unification or collective.
Unification. It's a very, very different thing. It's like a religious experience. It's something outside of, and that's why it's so popular. Fishing is another one. So there are lots of things that we do quite naturally, which are already there. So it's like it's not like I have to give people any advice, because people are doing all these things anyway. Mm-hmm. But I think there can be a spiritual component. I mentioned the cathedrals, which are essentially temples of contemplation and inactivity. Look how important they thought it was to do nothing. They built these absolutely vast cathedrals. And
they work, don't they? Because it's where we are, the space that we're in actually does change our state of mind, doesn't it? So they do their job.
They do their job, because I mean, look at the space we're in definitely changes our state of mind. I so agree with that, and people sort of forget that systems make people behave in certain ways. A simple example is the car.
Mm-hmm.
So you can take a mild-mannered poet who in normal situations he would walk into a cathedral and feel uplifted, calmed, and a sort of spiritual connection, and you put them in a motor car on a crowded roundabout and they turn into a completely different person, quite aggressive, possibly swearing and angry. It's the same person, isn't it? Being a parent suddenly makes you into a parent. There was a joke that before I had children, I didn't really care about people putting their feet on the sofa. And now I think it's like one of the most heinous crimes that anyone could commit. So what the hell do you think you're doing, putting your feet on the sofa?
Yeah,
you sort of become a parent. It's so weird. So I think your external environment does have a massive effect. And so churches are free; they're everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They're a really good resource to go to in your lunch break. Just sit in the church for a bit. You don't have to be religious. I mean, I don't go to church every week or anything, but I do love visiting cathedrals, and I'm really keen on pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm.
All these old-fashioned ideas, pilgrimage, going for a long walk with a few mates with a destination in mind. I mean, it's just so enjoyable, particularly if there's a bit of beer involved at the end of it. And, it doesn't cost anything.
Yeah,
it's like free. Pilgrimages were the medieval holiday, like in Chaucer, the Canterbury Tales. They had a great time It was like, what happens on pilgrimage stays on pilgrimage. It was a time to kind of relax. It was like a festival. Festivals were another thing. We love, Victoria and I love festivals. We run a festival. Festivals were another time. I think what happened is we used to have all these religious festivals, but they were controlled by the church, and then they were banned by the Reformation in England anyway. And but they sort of come back via things like Glastonbury Festival, and then and local festivals, literary festivals. Local villages still have their annual fetes and things like this. So there's quite a lot of fun around to be had in the forms of festivals. And festivals, again, they take you into a different place where work and money, striving, numbers, and competition sort of don't seem so important anymore.
Yeah. So I mean, again, it sounds like what you're saying is again about that art of crafting that life, and maybe looking out for some of these kind of spaces. So looking out for these, watching how you change with the role, looking out for fun, and actually perhaps consciously introducing it again into your.
I think that's right, Susanna. That word crafting is a really good one, isn't it? I mean, and you want to sort of letting life happen to you. Look at your life as a sort of work of art, something you can actually change, you can mold. The Stoic wisdom would say, concentrate on changing the things that are within your power to change, and stop wasting energy on the things which are not in your power to change. Whatever they are. I mean, one thing actually, sort of tip, I'm sure you've discussed this, is like,
because you hold that thought actually, because I always ask every guest for their tweak for the week, as it were, because that's what we ask. So with this in mind, would maybe go ahead there and kind of say what might be a recommendation.
Okay, well, a recent tweak of the week I suggested, which got a very good response from our readers, is turn off Radio 4 and turn on Radio 3.
Okay. Explain that to us now. A lot of people will be listening in Ireland. So.
Okay. So you have RTE, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think RTE.
You might know about Radio 4, but not so much Radio 3, perhaps.
Yeah. So the idea here is, and I think RTE is a fantastic station. We were just on the west coast of Ireland for the Other Voices Festival in Dingle. That is an amazing festival. I would definitely check out what they do on YouTube. I mean, again, it was a festival. It was in the streets. It's sort of free. You walk in and out of these pubs. There's absolutely incredible music going on everywhere. Not just traditional Irish music, but Irish music using traditional instruments, but brought right up to date and doing some really weird stuff. People like Junior Brother and so on. It was absolutely amazing. And the guy who runs it, Philip, has a show, I think, on RTE where he plays very sort of eclectic forms of music.
Okay.
But the point really then I'm making is cut down on the news. News. We love it. We're addicted to it. But again, it's all this stuff you can't do anything about that just stresses you out. Switch on the classical music instead. That's what Radio 3 is. So it's all about classical music and avant-garde and experimental music, interesting music. Okay. Music, that is the key. So turn off the chatter and the depressing news. Cut down on the news. That's the tweak.
Okay, fantastic. That's a great recommendation, and a really novel one. So we'll have to finish up here, Tom, but thank you for being with us. You're editor and publisher of the bi-monthly magazine, The Idler. So can you tell people where, if they'd like to subscribe, because subscription is free, isn't that right? So if people would like to kind of have these ideas brought to their inbox on a regular basis, where should they subscribe?
Yeah, there are different levels. So you can buy the magazine. It's like a little book. It's on sale in Eason's in Ireland, so you should be able to find it. Go to Eason's; they'll be able to get it if they haven't got one, and you'll see it on the sale there. You can sign up to our mailing list for free, and we send you 1, 2, or 3 emails each week. It's a letter from the editor from me. So I'll take some sort of topic that's in the news and give a sort of fresh angle on it. It might be something like, the tip I just mentioned about cutting back on news. My son remarked to me that he said the other day to me, "You are unnecessary." And I thought that was quite a funny line, unnecessary. So I wrote an essay about that. So it's little sort of funny things about everyday life.
Yeah.
And that's free. And then you can go further and get the magazine delivered, which I think is 40 quid. We also run online courses. But go to idler.co.uk and they can have a look at listeners and check out what we do.
Great. And you've got a retreat or a festival coming up in the new year, is that correct?
Yes, in July we have a festival in London at Fenton House, which is a really lovely National Trust building for about 400 or 500 people, a small festival.
Okay.
And we also take groups of readers to one of two really lovely villas in Italy, where we explore the local art and scenery and go on foraging walks, and I give lectures about ancient philosophy, different ways of living well.
That sounds gorgeous. That is a really, really nice way to escape all of the busyness of our lives. That sounds a fantastic idea. Tom, thank you so much for being with us today. Really, really appreciate it. As I mentioned, you've so many books out there, but it's Tom Hodgkinson, and you'll get him at the idler.co.uk if you want to look up more, and obviously you'll find some of his books, most of his books, all of his books, I think, online. So do kind of just follow that up, and actually, because it will help you to just, I think, to reflect and to find new ways of saying, well, do you know something, I may not be able to do that, but actually, I could try that, or I could try that this weekend, or just eke in little, I think, reclaim little moments of your precious life. And I think that's what it's all about. So, Tom, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Really nice.